I can understand, okay, there's some kind of like UFO there. Maybe there's UFO occupants in it, and I was able to see them, to see the like the craft. But the part that really hit me was like, how was it that a random person from work says something to me? I go home and I have this crazy UFO dream, and then another family member says something to me, and then I have a broad daylight sighting of a UFO. That doesn't make sense. Like that does not compute. I could kind of make sense of like I had a UFO sighting in broad daylight, right? Like, but the all the other,
Almost this concept of your attention's being drawn to that, or like your awareness.
well, I mean, again, it gets into this aspect of high strangeness that includes synchronicity, and I, I mean, even to this day, I can try to like theorize and make theories, but otherwise, it doesn't make any sense that that could happen.
Yeah. It's specifically being that it's tailored to their immediate need or their, will be kind and say, their national security prerogative. But ultimately, how does that make sense in a democracy?
Correct. I was going to say, specifically in the United States, because we're supposed to be a democracy. Who are you to make a decision like that on behalf of everyone?
Yeah. Well, let me kick it off. James, I really appreciate you actually making the time for this and even being on the podcast. Full disclosure, I love this subject. And you are my first person that I'm getting the opportunity to speak about it. So first of all, thank you for making the time. Appreciate it. And two, I got turned on to you by watching one of your videos. And just as we were chatting, it was the one with Jim Simivan. And when I got to the end, I just thought you were really good at interviewing. And I said that to you earlier, that your ability to just allow the guest to kind of go was amazing. I just saw how your silence allowed the guest to just make up the silence by just further going into their subject matter. So with that, I'm going to try to do that with you today. And ultimately, for some folks that maybe don't understand your story or haven't seen your content, which we'll go ahead and link to everything, can you just describe or explain to me what your growing up looked like and why this subject matter is even relevant to you today?
Sure. I mean, my growing up was pretty normal, other than anomalous experiences I had. I live over here in New York, um, in the Hudson Valley, actually, where in the 1980s there was a lot of UFO activity. Coincidentally, probably because of Indian Point over here is a nuclear facility that could have something to do with it. But uh, very early on, I was having what people consider anomalous experiences. Like,
How do you define that for somebody that doesn't know? How do you define that?
right. The very basic it started off with, and this doesn't really have to do with non-human intelligence directly per se. I mean, until you get into the latter part of the conversation, actually, it might. But I was having spontaneous out-of-body experiences, and I always assumed that most people had these. So, something like you're laying down or you're going to sleep, and as you're going to sleep, all of a sudden you're looking down at your body, right? So I would have that spontaneously. I didn't induce it in any way. It would just happen
And always when you slept?
when I was going to sleep. Yeah.
Got
In
it.
in this in this regard, yes. Um, I'd be going to like it's always like right when you're falling asleep, and the reason uh, that it was interesting is because my consciousness did not lapse, in the sense where I was in a dream or something and then it happened. My consciousness was awake while I was laying down,
As you
and
transitioned into
then
that state?
correct. And I didn't realize I had transitioned until I was looking down at myself. And I was like, holy shit, that's me.
Yeah.
and then boom, automatically, for most people, you'll just go right back in your body. So I found stuff like that interesting.
How did
I
you
did.
process that? Because you said you were a kid at this time. How do you process that information? How do you process that experience?
So that's the thing, because if you have it at such a young age, it is not very strange, right? It didn't seem weird because it was my early experience.
Did you
So
normalize it because you just experienced it that frequently? It then became normal?
it did seem normal. I Yeah, I never thought of that as too weird, but I at the same time, I at that age I was not really philosophically dwelling on what that means about
Yeah.
reality, and it was just like an experience, and I know I experienced it, and I was like, wow, that's awesome. I didn't really dwell on it much because I I didn't. I wasn't thinking there was some kind of profound implications about the nature of reality and consciousness at that point, right?
Right.
My mind wasn't there for that. It was more just like a really interesting experience, and I didn't really ask too many people about it, but
How old? Sorry, how old were you when this started? When you would, as far back you can remember.
I mean, the first time that I can really like consciously recall, like I said, in that single stream of awareness thing, was in first grade.
Wow,
Um, because
that's
I
young.
remember, because it was one of my first sleepovers at a friend from school's house. So I mean, it stood out to me because of that. But um, it was again, it was interesting enough where it was fascinating. And but again, at that age, I didn't have the context of about the nature of reality, or this is not supposed to happen. Um, I That really was not in my mind at that time.
Did you ever share that with friends or family? Did you say, "Hey, question, does this ever happen to you?"
A few of my friends, and I had, because one of my friends, uh, that friend, he had not experienced it, but I had another friend who was kind of into this stuff, and he had similar type of experiences, but like really only one of my friends really did um, have similar type experiences. Um, my family, not so much, but I mean, at that point about the out of body experiences, uh, yeah, because I mean, I wasn't really at that point, especially at that age, not thinking about it as a big deal. It wasn't until I got a little bit older that I realized, like, socially it wasn't as normal in the sense where people don't talk about it every day in
Did you ever have a
as
reaction from somebody in a negative way? Maybe you shared it and somebody said, "You're weird."
you know what, I
Good.
didn't
Okay.
really. um and my older sister, was always interested in like astrology and and all that kind of stuff.
So the
So
subject matter wasn't taboo for, let's say, at
no,
least between you and your sister, maybe your household.
right, yeah. So I mean, my household, I was raised Roman Catholic, just because I'm an Italian in New York, right?
Yeah.
This is like par for the course. But I did CCD, and I had that kind of religious upbringing. It was not. They put me through CCD and everything, but my parents weren't really religious themselves. My grandma was super, super religious, but in a way that when I was younger, it actually made me skeptical, because I was thinking about my grandma, like, you believe that all this stuff? Because I was going to CCD and learning this stuff, and just maybe a rebellious nature of mine. I just, I was, I'm, I like to inquire and ask
Yeah.
questions, and though that, and when I would go to CCD, some of the people there were nice, but a lot of times they just not entertain your line of inquiry. So I was just like, whatever.
Or maybe
But
brought back to religion, right? I also grew up Catholic. The idea being everything had to go through the prism of religion. and dogma. So that could have been maybe an
Yeah.
experience too.
Yeah, but as I got older, I guess I appreciate, um like, my grandma was, again, super religious, but I appreciate that more nowadays. Um that she was so invested in a path, you can say, because a lot of if somebody, the way that she was devoted or devotional to it was in a way what I would consider spiritual.
Hmm.
So I appreciate people who are dedicated to their religions, in a sense, because a lot of them are in some way seeking spirituality, right? Understanding in different ways. Uh, but the so I had early experiences also with UFOs, with like shadow type entities,
Let's take it
and
one at a time, if that's okay, James, because these are very important things to me. So your first experience, was it a UFO or a shadow being after the out of body
the
experience?
yeah, with the shadow type entity, and I say shadow type entity because it was it you could see the form of it almost like anthropocentric, like it had head, arms, torso, and it was like a shadow entity, but it had a very mild scintillation to it that you could see some kind of glow.
So
And
a shadow being as far as translucent, shadowy, or it's a think about it. I'm looking at the wall and I see that it's the part of that wall is taken up by what I see as a figure, shadowy.
kind of, but again, it had like a very soft glow to it that distinguished it.
As a
But
light glow, meaning in the dark it glowed and you could see it.
very mildly,
Got it.
you were able to distinguish between that and like actual shadow, and like the wall and whatnot. But
How old were you, by the way, when this first time
this was
happened?
actually probably before the out of body
Oh
experience,
wow,
but
this is young.
it's around that same time period. 5, 6, 7. Um, it was around that all this simultaneously occurred. Um, Not like back to back, day to day, but it was in that
Right.
same time
Mm-hmm.
period. And but the I guess the most frightening thing about that experience, because it was frightening, not in a threatening way, just in a way where I didn't know what was going on, was that this entity, um, or entities, was highly telepathic. And uh, what I mean by that is, telepathy is not just. I mean, the telepathy tapes are out now, and I
Yeah.
encourage people to take a look at that because it's going to broaden the range of what people would consider telepathy. And they have some really great examples of potentially actual telepathy being studied scientifically now that is hopefully underway.
What was
But
your experience of that? How did that feel like to you? How was that experience?
yeah, so it's not just like people think of telepathy and they think like, you hear a voice in your head.
Mm-hmm.
And that's part of it, but it's like one it's only one layer of it, and there's many layers.
So what was your experience of that telepathy? Like help me
So
understand what you experienced.
the first thing that I heard was, you know, it was right when I saw the entity. I heard, he can see us, and that freaked me out because
As
there's
a
something.
voice or as just an acknowledgement? That's kind of what I'm trying to understand. A
This
person
is
that's never
really, yeah, it's
experienced.
really hard to explain because it's not just a voice. There's a feeling, like a
Yeah.
bodily sensation quality to it, but there's also some kind of merging of consciousness, or there's a lock on with your attention and their attention. It's really hard to explain. It's
So
like,
let me give you what I'm picking up, or at least what you're sharing. It's almost like you were there in that experience with them. you were the one that said, "Hey, he just saw us," and it in whatever data that you would get normally, whether it be an emotion, the thought, the voice, it comes all at once. That's how I'm perceiving this. That it happened for you,
Yeah,
as
and
if you were
it's,
them. It's just, but you're sitting and you're like, "That's weird. I didn't think about that."
I mean, you can tell it's something from outside, so to say. Like you know, it's not your own thinking, or your own voice. It's very clear. Um, and again, it was pretty frightening, just because
It's a
I
new
had not,
sensation, right? It's something net new to you. You've never
yeah,
experienced that before,
brand
and it
new,
just happened.
brand new. And so, and the entity, it moved, and it it turned into a ball of, like an orb
So from a
from
shadow
its,
to an orb.
yeah, but it always stayed the exact same scintillation the whole time. But I only ever saw that the one entity, but for some reason in my mind I was fixated on that there's three of them that are there, um, for whatever reason. And then it, um, if you ever saw the movie Knowing with Nicolas Cage, and whoever did that movie, I don't know if they did research or they had an actual experience themselves, but they, in that movie, there's something called the whisper people, and you hear like this unintelligible whispering. Um, and I was frightened when this experience is going on. Again, not that I was threatened, but just because it was a novel experience, and I'm trying to like block myself off from it basically, and I would hear that kind of whispering, like exactly from that movie, just like that.
Mm-hmm.
And it was it was frightening. There was, so because this happened, uh, probably more than a half dozen times over a period of a few years. So it wasn't too frequently, but frequent enough that I knew that it was real. Um, and I would always end up, the first time I just stayed there, but all the other times I would actually leave my room after some time, and like literally go somewhere else in my house. Um,
When you experienced this, were the experiences very short and maybe you left or those beings left? Or was there ever a time that it was prolonged enough where you got to sit with it?
no, it was. It was never too long. It was never longer than a few minutes. But I mean, that was long. It felt like a long time, but like retrospectively, it was only a few minutes each time
And
that
just
I'm
for
aware of.
context for people hearing this, why I ask is imagine something profound happens and you have a couple minutes. It's really more, you almost have to experience that moment after that moment because you're processing it. It just happened too fast.
Yeah, usually like the first reaction is you freeze up, because it's, again, it's frightening. I don't
Yeah.
know. I mean, again, later on, I during research you hear about certain non-human intelligences having the ability to alter your consciousness, for for better or worse. I don't know if there was any of that in effect, but at that time I didn't have any kind of, um, awareness of that, so
Right.
I don't know if any of that was going on, other than the telepathy. And again, these experiences are, I would still say that they're highly subjective and open to interpretation, because it's different, because even within ufology, right, you have a very like nuts and bolts camp of research, and then there's more of, the other side of the research, which I would consider phenomenology, which is the study of subjective experience. And the thing about the UFO subject is that it happens to kind of transcend both, and it demonstrates both, because you can have, which I'll get into, is like a physical craft that is metal and by all accounts is as real as any other 3D object in our consensus reality. But however, accompanied by that are what were called by Dr. J. Allen Hynek, who was the astronomer who worked for the U.S. Air Force Project Blue Book, came up with the term high strangeness. Him and Jacques Vallée, one of the guys who helped create the
Yeah.
internet, to say that these experiences are accompanied by such a profound level of strangeness that it does not make sense in what we consider the like the laws of reality today. Obviously, that could be facilitated technologically, but with the UFO phenomenon, it's not just one or the other. You genuinely have both.
I mean, you have a lot more knowledge, and we'll get into all the research you've done as well. But as a young man experiencing this, what did you have to do to process these events? Like, help me understand a person that's never experienced it, how somebody like you goes and wakes up the next day and goes to school when this happened.
Yeah. Well, with those experiences, again, I did not really. I mean, I didn't talk about it because I knew to some point that like people don't talk about stuff like that.
Yeah.
That was far out there. And it was shortly after that that I was having UFO sightings.
So for somebody that doesn't understand when you mean UFO sightings, what does that actually mean to you? What is the reality that you see?
Yeah, so those UFO sightings when I was younger were very basic, lights in the sky, right? I mean, at that age, I didn't really have like the wherewithal to distinguish a satellite in the 90s, to be
Sure.
honest. I knew a plane, of course. I knew stars and stuff. And,
But you knew the basics, like there's street lights, right? You knew that
correct.
you could
Yeah.
distinguish between, yeah, that's a pretty cool street light or bright
But
or others. So you would say, but that one doesn't make sense.
yeah, there would be balls of light in the sky. And I actually tried to photograph them with those disposable cameras that
Oh,
we had
wow.
back in the day. And, they never came out. And again, this didn't happen too frequently. It happened a number of times though, and I remember going out and trying to take pictures of these lights, but because of all the earlier experiences with the out of body experiences with those entities and with these orbs or balls of light, I was always fascinated in metaphysics or even UFO research. I also part of where I grew up. The Hudson Valley UFO wave happened in the 80s. And
Do you think that was your first experience or first understanding of maybe tying those to that? Meaning you have no concept of it, they're experiences you're having. When do you start associating those to the UFO? Obviously, back then we all used UFO. Now
well,
we call it the phenomenon. When did you start making that correlation?
so I honestly not until some years after. And like the balls of light in the sky, whatever, like, yeah, I could interpret those as UFOs. But those experiences with the entities, I did not I did not correlate them with UFOs until many years later, until after I was 20 years old, because I had a series of like in your face contact experiences in 2007. And that is when I had experienced the telepathy again.
Okay.
And it wasn't until that I said, holy crap, maybe that has something to do with this.
Can
To
you
this
explain
day,
what happened?
yeah, yeah, that's getting to a because that was a whole series of events. That so in 2007, I'm 20 years old, and at by 20 years old, I'm already practicing like formal meditation since I was 18.
What got you into
Actually,
that?
okay, that's kind of where I was getting into, was that because of all those experiences, I was always interested in like metaphysics. At the time I would not have called it that, but like consciousness studies.
Yeah.
So I was always fascinated by like psychic phenomenon. If there was ever like a late night UFO program on TV, I you know I can't remember the one that's like so famous now. Um, but that, those kind of programs, would they come on, I was always fascinated, and I thought there was something to them, obviously.
Like
But
programs like ancient aliens and things of that
this would
nature.
be way before that,
Oh, okay.
1990s. So I can't remember the most famous one that everybody knows.
You talking about the X Files, the TV show?
No. That it was like more documentary style.
Got it.
I'm blanking on the. They made a more recent series of it, and I think it had the same guy voicing it and everything. But if somebody will know in the comments
Yeah, I think
what
you're talking
show I'm
about that
talking about.
Netflix special that does the unsolved cases or strange things.
Unsolved Mysteries.
Unsolved mysteries.
Unsolved
Yeah,
Mysteries.
got
Yeah.
it.
So there was the old school version,
Yeah.
right? So like if that one would come on, or they have like some UFO files, it was always fascinating to me. And I started going. I was in like I lived in Barnes and Noble from my late teen years, and I would I'd go around in every section just looking at like what is out there. We had the internet at that time, but it was
It was
basic.
not the
But I
same.
would yeah, it was not the same. And so I'd see all these books and whatever, and when I found like the meditation books, I was like, I know what they're talking about when they're describing these kind of meditative states. They sound familiar, especially with the Eastern philosophy. It really clicked with me innately. So I
And when you say click, do you feel like it's more like intuition? It drew you?
It just seemed so obvious to me.
Got
Is
it.
the best way I can describe it. It seemed like I know what they're talking about. Yes, like this that makes more sense to me than like how it would be described in another consensus way. So because of that, and also I was practicing Chinese martial arts, and they were doing like qigong, and and part of Chinese martial arts, there's the marriage between Taoism and Buddhism,
Hmm.
and even just on a very practical level, people meditation to calm the mind to perform better, right? But there's obviously deeper spiritual levels to that. But even just on a very practical level, it's something that's applicable, right? It's a practical application of something. But so because of that, I was practicing just very basic, like Taoist and Buddhist type meditations, and so yeah. But so let me get into this. By the time I'm 20 in 2007, again, I had been researching UFOs and meditation and consciousness and all that psychic phenomenon to kind of casually, right? I mean, I wasn't on a mission per se, as after these events I was. But so in 2007, I had I was working an overnight shift, and a coworker that I would always speak to in the morning, he would always come by. He was the porter, and his conversations with me was like, "Hey, how's your family? Kind of what's going on here at work." I'd see him for 10, 15 minutes. That was it. But for some reason, this one morning, he said to me, "Hey, did you hear about the UFOs in Mexico?" And I thought that was extremely odd, but he didn't know that I had any kind of interest or anything with those subjects, because I wouldn't talk about that back then at work. So I thought it was strange, but I told him no, because I didn't. In my mind, the only thing I can think of was, seeing on TV or the internet or something that there was like sightings in Mexico City, but not at that exact day, but in general.
Yeah.
But I told him no, I didn't hear about it, and that was that was the end of that. I didn't really think about it past that. So, my shift ended, and I went home. So, it was an overnight shift, so I got out at 8 a.m. I was home probably by like 8:30, and I went to sleep. And when I went to sleep, I had this really this really intense dream. So it surely it was a dream, right? Um, where I'm in my old neighborhood, and again, I didn't piece some of these things together until later on. Was that where this dream was where I used to see UFOs when I was a kid, right? But I wasn't thinking about that at the time. But so in this dream, I'm in my old neighborhood and I'm driving down a block and there's just a UFO over me, like maybe 20, 30 feet over me. It was like an orange.
Wow, that's close. 20 or 30
Yeah.
feet.
Again, it's a dream, but it was
Right.
very intense. And and this is going to get into what I described before as the high strangeness. So there's this like plasma electric orange UFO, and it's like pulsing with electricity, and I can feel the electricity pulsing through me when it's like pulsing. And I'm just driving, trying to get away. I'm like, holy crap. And I could never make distance from this object, no matter how fast I went and where I turned. And after a few minutes of that dream, I just wake up, I snap out of my dream, and I'm kind of like, oh, coming to. And one of my family members comes in my house and they say, hey, did you hear about the UFOs in Mexico? And that's when I was like, screw this, right? Because
Yeah.
at this point, the guy had said something to me at work who would not talk about the subject ever. Then I had the dream, and then my family member said something to me. So I'm like, something is off here. So I got out of my house and I was going to go to this Chinese place down the block where I would just get some chicken and broccoli all the
Yeah.
time, like a few times a week, especially after the gym. But I was like, let me just go. I'm just gonna grab some food and like clear my head. So I get in my car and I start driving, and within a few hundred feet, again, this is like spring. It's probably 3:30 in the afternoon, clear blue sky. I just see a fireball stationary in the sky, and I think to myself, "Holy shit, that's a UFO." But the second that I thought that, it went from stationary to start to move, and um, I was like super excited, right? I
And sorry, were you saw this while driving or you saw this while you were standing somewhere?
driving.
Driving.
I
Okay,
was
so you're
driving.
driving, you're trying to drive, pay attention to that and still kind of go back and see that.
Yeah, it's right in the center of my vision,
Oh, wow. Okay.
right in the center of where I was looking, and so and I say it was like a fireball because it had this kind of living quality to it. It like almost like a lava lamp or like a ball of fire or
Yeah,
something.
like flame, how flame kind of it's moving and
Yeah,
it's
I mean, it was very contained as a
yeah,
sphere, but within the sphere, it had that quality to it.
almost like the sun does, right? It's like this idea of
Correct,
movement.
right,
Hmm.
right. Except there was no rays coming off it, but yeah, like
Yep.
exactly like the sun. That's why I say plasma. But so I try to chase it, and this is the opposite from the dream. Uh, but eventually, it gets out of my range of sight because I'm driving and it's just going on its own path, and eventually it just goes over the horizon where like trees are in the way and everything, and I lost sight of it, and I was just I mean, I was thrilled, I thought it was amazing, but it wasn't until like I'm like again coming to processing this, right? Like at first I was just crazy excited that I saw a UFO in broad daylight, right? That was amazing. But then like after like I'm coming down from that, right? That excitement starts to settle and I'm like actually able to think about what's going on. What really hit me was not even the fact that I saw the UFO in broad daylight. It was how the hell, like I can understand. Okay, there's some kind of like UFO there. Maybe there's UFO occupants in it, and I was able to see them, see the like the craft or
Yeah.
whatever. But the part that really hit me was like, how was it that a random person from work says something to me? I go home and I have this crazy UFO dream, and then another family member says something to me, and then I have a broad daylight sighting of a UFO. That doesn't make sense. Like, that does not compute. I could kind of make sense of like I had a UFO sighting in broad daylight, right? Like, but the all the other parts of it, that doesn't make sense
Almost this
at
this
all.
concept of your attention's being drawn to that, or like your awareness.
Well, I mean, again, it gets into this aspect of high strangeness that includes synchronicity, and I, I mean, even to this day, I can try to like theorize and make theories, but otherwise, it doesn't make any sense that that could happen, right? That again, I can make sense of the idea of like somebody having a UFO sighting by chance, but I mean, what is that? Were those experiences that I had prior to the sighting engineered by UFO intelligence? Were they somehow manifested by my own consciousness, or was it co-created by my consciousness and another consciousness for it to facilitate that way? I mean, I don't know. That's why it gets into these much, much, much deeper questions than are there other entities visiting us, or are there other intelligences out there in the universe? You know, it gets into a whole other order of conversation,
Yeah.
which is like, how is this even possible? Because this again, this ideas are well beyond. Is there intelligent life out there, and are they visiting us? It's getting into the territory of like, is my consciousness somehow interacting with the fabric of reality itself, in that this was able to occur, or was this some kind of sequence engineered by UFO intelligence? Even technologically, do they have the ability to technologically alter space-time to allow you these type of experiences? Right, it's not just like, okay, they can have telepathy with you. Can they can can UFO intelligence engineer synchronicities for experiencers in order for them to experience a certain thing or process reality a certain way? That's getting that's getting much into deeper territory than are we being visited by extraterrestrials.
Sure, but I think this is you giving it the thought and the time that you believed it deserved. I'm assuming all of these thoughts didn't come to you immediate. It's more of the
Right.
digesting and processing would happen for you to get to, yes, this, I should probably think a little bit deeper to this, because you could have written all of this off.
Yeah, and kind of to what you're saying is like, I'm still processing it.
Yeah.
I'm still questioning it. I'm still like coming to grips with it. Not in a way where it's like every day it's shocking to me. Like, you become kind of accustomed to it in the sense where it does somewhat normalize. Like, what goes up must come down. Like, the excitement from it to some level is not always the same, right? Um, just like you build a tolerance to those kind of experiences, even though it's always like exciting to have such an experience, but it becomes more familiar. And to this day, I'm always still trying to see like, how does this fit? And in that sense, I try to let those experiences inform my research, um, but in a way that I still like. I'm not going to be in denial, in the sense where, because I mean, you can get into a very dark place if you're just forever questioning, like, did this actually happen? Um,
You have to
and
come out of that with some fundamental truths of your own. Otherwise, you just feel lost, I'm assuming is what you're getting at.
you kind of have to accept it for what
Yeah.
it is. You have to have some level of acceptance because, again, I those experiences, like, I did not talk about for a number of years publicly. Like, I wasn't just going out sharing this kind of stuff. There were a few close friends and family that I told, uh, but I was not talking about this. But that experience is actually just one part of a series of experiences that happened, and because that
So did that experience help you maybe be more in the moment for the ones that come after that, do you think?
not I mean maybe, but because that that one experience was kind of the beginning of a series of what I would consider these three experiences that happened in the frame of about 2 months.
Wow, that's
And
a short
that
time frame.
right, and so that is what that was my my wake up call, in the sense where by the conclusion of the three experiences, I was changed. I was not the same person per se. Like, and I try to describe having a close encounter as a transformational experience. And it could be somebody that has like a near death experience, or some kind of traumatic life experience. Um, for some people, psychedelics, right? Like there's all these other things. Even somebody goes away on a 10-day meditation retreat, and they have a spontaneous awakening in their consciousness. Like these kind of experiences are can transform you in many ways. The reason I really like the UFO subject is that, like I said before, there's some level of subjectivity to it, but there is a level of objectivity, in the sense with the UFO phenomenon. Not only are there these like extraordinary experiences that individuals have of like telepathy, precognition, seeing, entities or interacting with them in some way, but on top of that, you know, in many instances, these objects are tracked on radar by the military. Uh, the gun camera footage is collected. Satellites pick them up. So there's something physically there, as far as we understand it, in a modern consensus physics idea, right? But there's the other kind of uncomfortable part to some people, that there's that level of high strangeness, right? Which some people in the intelligence community have likened it to, like you to understand the UFO phenomenon on the high strangeness level, you have to understand quantum mechanics, right? It's like whatever this intelligence is seems to be able to interact at that level.
What would you suggest, or why don't we have this conversation more openly at the dinner table with people? What do you think is missing? Is it that I have to go and have an experience to be open to this? Or do you feel that we should just be having open communication of possibilities that may exist? How do we, as I call it, how do you get through the fourth wall to say, let's just have a conversation so we could start normalizing the subject to find what this could be? What would you suggest people do to make this more normal? Hopefully listen to this podcast and say, I want to talk to somebody close to me. How should we be approaching this, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think nowadays we're more fortunate in the sense where it is finally becoming a public issue. The stigma around the issue is diminishing greatly, because whistleblowers have come forward. Many people within, at least even just the U.S. government, but other governments as well, have come forward with their firsthand testimony or secondhand testimony, stating that UFOs are real. But people have to understand that this idea that you can't talk about UFOs around the dinner tables by design, because in the 1940s, and specifically in the 1950s, the U.S. Air Force and the CIA and other think tanks and part apparatus of the national security state, initially they stated that you know their reasoning was, we can't talk about UFOs and have people calling in UFO reports constantly, because it's going to jam up our communications network, and so that would leave us vulnerable to attack from another nation state, right? That
Hmm.
was kind of the excuse that they came out with out of the U.S. Air Force. So but there's government documents talking about publicly ridiculing, denying, and distorting any information that has to do with UFOs. And again, in these, I forget the exact documents, but they're not contestable, right? They're documents that came out through the Freedom of Information Act. They're not like potential fakes or whatever. They're non-contested United States government documents on UFOs that say, if people start to talk about this, number one, we're going to deny it. Number two, we're going to ridicule those individuals and make them look silly. So this architecture of stigma was by design via the United States government under the guise of national security. Which I mean, again, when it comes to this national security thing, there's validity to it, right? I live in the United States. I'm an American, so I understand. All right, there's the complexity of let's say the United States government is actively um, collecting like crash retrievals, right? Maybe they're even causing some of them, right? And they're reverse engineering this technology. They don't want other nations to know what we have, and so there would be counterintelligence programs around that by default, right? They would have to. And it's not like, and I've heard people from, again, I've had some of these intelligence people on my podcast, and it's not like they don't want the American people to know. That's just kind of like the side effect of, well, we can't let other nation states know what we have and what we're doing and what we know. So unfortunately, like if you tell the American people, or they say even if you tell Congress, now the other nations that are also potentially doing the same thing know what we have and what we're up to. So that's the way I've heard it described from people within the intelligence community. But in order to have these conversations, I mean, nowadays it's much easier because you can just point to the news. You can say, "Hey, did you see this congressional hearing on UFOs?" I always when I because I I always talk to, especially now I'm kind of a public figure more or less nowadays, in the sense where
Yeah.
I'm out of the closet now with everything, for better or worse. So I'll talk to, even when I was in the closet, I would bring up something like the Disclosure Project, which happened in 2001, where there were a bunch of there's like 20 or so firsthand or secondhand witnesses from the U.S. government that had firsthand experience either with a UFO encounter while on duty or the like. But now there's many more people that have come forward like that, and it's helped to facilitate a more public conversation. Because again, nowadays you can reference, hey, did you see that New York Times article, right? Even if the person's kind of on the fence about UFOs, you have credible publications like the New York Times reporting on UFOs as a reality. So I think if you really want to broach the very basic level of this, first, you kind of want to sense like where people are coming from, where they're at. Like I'm not gonna more or less like I'm gonna talk to people on their level of interest, and I mean also too, if somebody, I don't want to bring a conversation to somebody that's gonna upset their worldview, right? That's not what I'm here to do. That so
Well, I think that, I mean, I agree with almost everything that you said. I believe one of the cop outs is this idea that you can't talk about the subject without talking about the technology. I get it. I don't sit here and talk to anybody about the military might of a certain technology that maybe the US has that I know about. That's never been a subject matter for me around the table. But I have talked about the geopolitics, or what could it mean for us, specifically in today's world of everything that's happening with our country and things that are Venezuela, everything that's changing. I don't talk about that. I might have a mention to it because it doesn't really affect my day-to-day world. But what does affect my day-to-day world would be like, let's say, the stock market. It would be, what does that mean to us and regulations, right? So when we really think about, I hate using the word alien, but non-human intelligence, why can't we actually have the conversation at the dinner table about implications, what that means to us as far as day-to-day life? How great would it be to be able to talk to somebody that might know a little bit more than you? How great would it be to understand life through a different perspective? Hence the purpose of this podcast. Why is it that when I hear most people talk about it, they want to make them both one and the same, like they're indistinguishable? I can't separate those. No different than we have the idea of, let's say, a technology conference compared to something more philosophical to say, let's just have that conversation, what it could mean. How is it that you would take an approach to talk about more of the philosophy so that the subject matter could be not as, how do I want to put it? People not have so much restriction to that or an instant, hey, I don't know if I feel comfortable, as you said, driving somebody to their worldview or to question it. It's more of, let's just have the conversation as this thing out here as a subject, not as how is this going to implode your, ideological belief.
Yeah. And what I mean by that is, like, if I see that what I'm talking about is making somebody uncomfortable, I'm not going to push on that anymore. That's just that's a very kind of like Taoist concept of, I'm not here to push them past what they're comfortable for. But I do think the majority of people nowadays can have the conversation. And real quick, the technology thing. I mean, I actually do believe that part of why this public UAP transparency push that's going on, I do think it is being influenced by part of the national security state and the intelligence community, and I think that they're trying to I don't want to say control the narrative like it's some kind of sinister force, right? But they're certainly trying to guide the conversation down particular routes of this is acceptable and this is not, for their own purposes, right? Um, Again, I'm not. Maybe some of it we would consider malicious, maybe not. But that's I don't think that there's some UAP transparency that's just, hey, let's just let everything go out of control. There's no doubt that there's people up here somewhere that are saying this is okay to talk about now. And I do believe that what is going on is a slow process of integrating some of these technologies into our society over the course of 2 decades or so. I'm just throwing that out there as like a placeholder number as an example to give some like a context. But I do believe that some of these technologies are going to be like, I believe some of them we already have, right? But I think that some of these technologies will be more integrated into our society, and they've slowly begun that process. But as far as like an everyday person conversation or around the dinner table, so to speak, I mean, if people are honest, right? Like most people are familiar with some type of religion, right? Whether it's Christianity, Buddhism, Islam, Judaism, uh, you know, all of those religions, every single one of them, if you're to take them to be true, right? If you're a believer, then you have to take into account that all of these religions talk about humans interacting with some other type of non-human intelligence. All
Yeah,
of
a
them.
higher existence of some kind.
Angels, demons, jinns, asuras, spirit guides, right? Whether you think that they're alien or spiritual entities or whatever you however you want to frame them, they all depend on the reality of humans interacting with some other type of intelligence, right? So if people are actually, this is what somebody brought this point up, and I thought it was hilarious because it's so true, is like in these, all these religious texts, there's talk about these kind of phenomenal experiences, but also what people would call a miracle, right? But it's like only that could have only happened then. It's like, why can't that happen today? You have the story of Fatima, which happened in Portugal, where thousands of people saw a huge object in the sky. They called it like a second sun, and even I believe the Catholic Church took note of this incident. So again, I think
Do you think that some of
having this,
the difficulty about having this conversation is possibly with the concept of the rigidity that people have towards religion?
well, towards religion, but also belief in general. Because I think when we're having this conversation, we have to be able to say, "I don't know. This is what information is available. This is what it could mean." But until we have, the hard facts, so to speak, I hate to say it like this, but until we have in the public domain, the craft and the bodies and whatever, uh, we're not at that level of the conversation where we can say these entities are exactly this. So, but I do think that we just have to keep an open mind and be able to just say I don't know, because there's if we're dealing with an advanced intelligence that's potentially more intelligent than us, potentially, in at least one way or another, maybe technologically or what have you. It's going to be hard for us. Like, do we even have the language to accurately describe the reality of that intelligence or being? Right? Like, do we even have the concepts that are applicable to accurately describe who or what they are? Can we understand how they think? Right? Are they like us in any way? Right?
I think
So
that where some of the things that limit us is understanding that it's progressionary. I need to understand step one for step two to be a little bit clearer. And if I'm not taking that approach of saying, look, I just need awareness to then, you know, I mean, you didn't get like this from yesterday. It's been years of you processing, digesting, challenging your thoughts, getting more information, continuously iterating what your truth is. I have I, I really don't understand. I'd love people to comment on this, to share their thoughts about what actually prevents from the subject matter just to be openly discussed in a way to say, let's just create a possibility. What if? And then I think that considering that, it's like that slow drip, the what if situations that you can consider. Hopefully you process it, you go through whatever emotions come up for you, and you come out the other side, hopefully being more towards, it's not that bad. It's possible. What could it mean for us? But I think that any change is the hardest thing for anyone. So we're not going to solve that problem. Change is change. But really about just the subject. How could I have this conversation from whatever level I'm at so that slowly it just garners interest in the subject matter to go deeper? I mean, you've gone really deep. So you've seen your progression with this from your experiences to now understanding so much more. But everybody kind of has to have that same progression. I don't think anybody could bypass that. And I think that's where the full disclosure, as you're talking about, becomes the issue. How do I take somebody from 0 to 100? It's too jarring. That's what I hope that this podcast does for anybody that listens to it, is to say, I just have to have a slow drip for myself, not to be given to me, but for me to seek it. I think that could be a great approach to this subject matter. And this is why I love what you do, is that you could consume your content and slowly kind of, gear up in that based on the guests that you have, the information that's shared. But there still has to be a start point. And I hope that listening to you and your experiences, it gets people there. It's like, I just need to start. Does that make sense?
yeah, And again, it is very much an integration process. I think it's helpful to for people to start off with, is this real? Right? Because I, even for myself, right? Like I had to go through all those steps that you were describing of, and a lot of people, like when they first start out on this kind of journey, let's say, where they're going to pursue the UFO reality, right? Like you'll start off with, wait, are UFOs real? And then they get to a point where they saw enough material, saw the books or that whatever evidence is publicly available, and they say, okay, I think there's something to this. Then, people will often go, okay, wow, UFOs are real. So, what are they? That's another level of it that you kind of have to digest and integrate. And then you get into, well, who are they? Who's piloting these vehicles? Or even, let's say, by nowadays understanding, remotely controlling them, right? Like a drone. Maybe they're not in our proximity, but they're sending UFOs through some kind of advanced AI and drone technology. They don't even technically have to be here. They could just be sending technology. Well, and because I'll get into that in a moment. Even the entities people see in the UFO literature, some people have said that these are biological androids. That these some of these intelligences are not actually sentient in the way that me and you are, but they're actually biological technology in some cases. I don't know if that's the case. That's just a theory. But again, you go through these layers and layers and layers of integration, and you kind of have to keep an open mind on some of it, and then some things you'll write off and say, I don't think this theory or whatever makes sense, and other things you're like, I can see how that's possible. And again, for most people, the first thing when they hear UFO, they think aliens, they think extraterrestrials. And even early for me, that I had to stop myself and say, wait a second. I'm automatically assuming that, like it's automatic within my mind. I'm not even like you like, even for me, I can't say I don't know for a fact that they're extraterrestrial or whatever, wherever they're from. There's so many theories, but you have to. I mean, that's almost like a meditative, either vipassana or inquiry vichara practice. Is like, you'll notice that you have these assumptions, but you have to stop and say, wait, why am I assuming that? And
It's so the ability for you to continuously keep an open mind through all of the new information, which I don't think, just society wise, we're not very good at that. We have to reduce or have the reductive reasoning to say, which bucket do I put you in? And I think that that's ultimately where we need to shift as a society to say, just keep it open. Stop putting people in buckets. Stop trying to find tribes. Stop trying to find a classification, and just be open to accepting what you see, so that you could be more open to the next layer of this conversation, which I have no idea what it is. Otherwise, I would say it. But the openness is what allows me to receive something new, or to go back and say, look, you said something that I've never considered. Can I hear you explain it? And I think if we don't keep that open mind, we're never going to be able to digest any of those realities. And I think that that is the hardest part for most of us, is to understand that we've lived this curated life. And really, maybe we just need to be open to understanding the real world that exists and to assimilate. Because what else does it mean for us? How better can we get if we were to allow that? So with that, I wanted you to maybe speak into some of these things that you actually do. Let's say I'm a person, I hear this conversation, I'm well beyond it, I've researched it. How do they get to actually take it within their own power and say, can I reach out directly? Because I think that's something that I don't know how to do, but you have experience in. I want to see if maybe you could go into that with this C5 protocol and just your own communication that you've done. Could you tell me about that? Because I'm super interested in it.
Yeah. So in different kind of lenses or versions, this has actually been going on for quite a long time. Most popularly today, it's known as CE5, which stands for Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, which is the fifth category of close encounter. You have CE1, CE2, CE3, CE4, and then CE5. So, a close encounter of the first kind is a visual sighting of a UFO within 500 feet. And again, this scale was actually made by Dr. Jalon Hynek from United States Air Force under Project Blue Book. That the first three categories were. So, and then close encounter of the second kind is that you see a UFO and the UFO leaves some kind of trace, physical mark, radiation. Somebody gets like a burn or something, or some object gets affected physically by the UFO, and it's measurable. Closer encounter of the third kind, as we all know, is in proximity to a UFO. There's a sighting of an entity, right? So Steven Spielberg's movie where the entities come out and have this interaction, that's a closer encounter of the third kind. Closer encounter of the fourth kind is popularly known as abductions, right? Or some people try to put it mildly and say onboard encounter. But close encounter of the fourth kind is more or less an abduction or onboard encounter, and then and close encounter of the fifth kind, which was dubbed by Dr. Stephen Greer, is a, an intentional interaction with UFO intelligence or non-human intelligence, UFOs, in that you're trying to facilitate some kind of UFO encounter. There's different degrees to it, where like the second degree CE5 would be you see an object and to you it's a UFO. You don't know if it's a genuine UFO or not, but so there's an alleged UFO in proximity, and you think to it, and it responds.
And when you say think to it, just to clarify, you don't vocalize your thought to it, like scream it out loud. You almost go inward and you think, and you just kind of put your focus to it as you say
Yeah,
whatever you say.
yeah, intention. Some people have vocalized it, and you can, but more or less, it's a response to your thought. So, I mean, you can become skilled at it in that you're more intentional with it, right? Or I mean, people who have had UFO sightings have thought, "Wow, I wish it would come closer," and all of a sudden, the object starts coming closer, and then they start to get a little frightened, and they're like, "Oh my god, that's enough," and then the object goes away. And there's been documented cases of this. Even Dr. J. Allen Hynek's last co-authored book called Night Siege, which actually has to do with the UFO, the Hudson Valley UFO wave, mentions a few cases like this. Even including like doctors and lawyers and what have you, policemen having these type of experiences. But as far as CE5 goes, or more broadly known as contact modalities, there's ways in which you can facilitate a UFO encounter. Uh, you know, to different levels of success. I mean, some you don't know what you're going to get necessarily because you're dealing with a non-human intelligence. So, I mean, nowadays I do have something of a disclaimer when I talk about CE5, just because let's say you want to have this kind of UFO encounter, and you're just curious, right? You want to know, is this are UFOs real, and am I able to actually facilitate an interaction with this intelligence? And you could be completely well-meaning, and you can go out and do a CE5 by there's simple protocols. You do a meditation, and then you go through the protocols, which I'll get to in a minute. But you can have a fantastic experience, but then all of a sudden, like, now you're in, right? Like, you are a true believer in the most positive sense, but like how's that going to affect your life? Like how now are you going to talk to your spouse about this, like your kids, your job, right? Like you're going to have all this enthusiasm. You might have to compartmentalize that part of your life, which is not healthy.
Could you
Because
give
now
anybody advice of how you've maybe navigated those waters personally?
that's a really long story. But I mean, you have to be wise to who you're talking to and what you're sharing with them. Because I mean, some people. I had a friend that was into spirituality. They were into meditation. They were into like all that stuff. And I told them about one of the experiences that I had, and their eyes just like they didn't know if I was like the initial look was shock. The second was, wait, is he messing with me or something? I could see him trying to process what I was telling him.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a very open-minded person, right? But now all of a sudden when you have like somebody that you know close to you telling you that this is real, now all of a sudden it's real. Now you have to really consider it. Other than if you see a program on TV and about UFOs, and even if it's super credible, you're like, oh wow, I could see that. But when it enters your life, right? When you have a brother or a very close
Close
friend
friend, yeah.
that is very credible come to you and say, I had this experience that had telepathy, and there was entities and or this craft that was like a few hundred feet away from me, they're not going to know where to put that necessarily.
I
Maybe
mean, I
they
don't think
they
you're the
will,
type of
but
person that goes to the Starbucks and taps the person in front of you and says, "Hey, let me tell you about this experience."
no. But even somebody that you know very well, like when when you come to them with something this and you're matter of fact about it, you don't know how that's going to affect them. So
So would you
you,
suggest for
I
people
mean,
that probably have these type of experiences that can say very directly, this is what happened, this is my experience, and share it, do you think they should probably seek out people that are seeking that type of input? Meaning,
there,
go
yeah,
ahead.
there's experiencer communities. My friend hosts a website called the Experiencer Group, and you can talk to other experiencers. I would suggest speaking to people in community in like that type of community first, and even ask. You might even want to ask them for advice, like how do I go? Because I mean, you might never just want to go up to your boss and say, "Hey, I had this experience," right? You just might never want to go there. So there's going to be people that you can be open with, and there's just people where it doesn't serve you in any way to share those type of experiences with people that are not intimate with you. But if you're considering talking, I mean, if somebody is an intimate part of your life, like a spouse, uh, or a parent or a very close friend, like you might want to consider being able to not compartmentalize yourself completely, because they're in in some regard you might start to compartmentalize your life in that way, where you just feel that you can't share some of this stuff with um
That
and
has to eat at
that
you,
is
right? You have some sort of reality that you experience and you can't share it. I don't know if that's
yeah,
healthy for
because
a person.
it's kind of not. And I mean, and like you want people to know, because this is it's something where you experienced it and it was fascinating, and you want to free other people's minds to know that this is real. But like that might not be your best option in some cases, right? uh Again, it depends on you, your personality, your sensitivity. um I have pretty thick skin, otherwise I probably wouldn't be out here publicly as much. Um, but I also have the conviction that I know what I experienced, right? And I didn't get into some of it, but um, I had experiences where my family was there, and there were extraordinary experiences and they saw it firsthand. So in that sense, I feel blessed, because if I had not had that, I don't know if I would be doing everything that I'm doing. Maybe I would have, but I mean, just knowing that they were there and they saw it and it wasn't just me. So I didn't even have to question myself. Like, they saw what I was seeing. And in that sense, I mean, that gave me a tremendous amount of conviction to be able to talk about this. Right. And again, even before talking to somebody about this, like if you had a personal experience, you might want to feel them out, right? And say, what do you think about this subject or UFOs or this congressional hearing? Now, people are unpredictable, so you could say that and they can kind of write it off. But when you say something you experience, they might be open to that. So it's a completely individual process and basis. And I would I would say, for better or worse, just my own kind of thinking and advice on it would be, give it some time, to reflect on. Um, because before you even start sharing it with people, you kind of want to process it for yourself, right?
Sure. I think that's great advice.
Because I mean, they could even discourage you from your own experience, right? They could, and that could be unhealthy for you, as if they were like, oh, it was probably this, and they now you're questioning your own sanity because of them, and they can be completely well-meaning, right? But so I would say integrate it into yourself first, uh, at the very least, and be confident in your own experience and conviction, and then from there start feeling around.
What advice would you have for a person that maybe has done that? They've digested it, they understand it's their truth. They're seeking to go to the next levels, possibly reaching out directly to figure it out, right? Even speaking for myself, maybe I want to do that. What advice do you have for somebody like me that is ready for that? What would you suggest for them to do to kind of take that approach?
For the CE5.
It's just direct contact. You talk about
Yeah.
CE5 and it's something that you've practiced. I'm asking just you as an individual that's an experiencer and has already done a lot of this work. Give me your advice from many years of doing this. How should somebody proceed if they're very clear they want to go that route?
I mean, generally, meditation is always advised, even just from a point of view of not even for like the idea that it's going to unlock some psychic ability, right? Which, hey, maybe it can, but like first things first, you want to be grounded before you do any kind of work like that. Even if you want to experiment with like the Monroe Institute gateway process and astral projection and out of body experiences, you need to have something that grounds you.
And when you say grounding, explain that to somebody that maybe doesn't understand what that means. What does grounding mean?
Yeah, so I mean, you have to have everything kind of within reference and context, where that um, you want to be. You need something to tie you into your normal reality, whether that be like your family or your job, something that anchors you to consensus reality, so that if you have an extraordinary experience, number one, you have to be able to question it, right, and say, is this just some kind of perceptual experience, or is this like a real interaction with a non-human intelligence? Um, because I mean, like one example is that like when people first go out to do CE5, everything they see in the sky is a UFO, just because you're looking for UFOs, right? And when you haven't had experience sky watching, there's so much stuff out there that you've never seen before because you weren't paying attention to it. So even in just the simplest aspect of sky watching, you have to always maintain the ability to say, I'm not sure on this one, right? Obviously, if it does something crazy and starts zigzagging and then boom, disappears or just flies up into space, you could probably say that, yeah, that's a UFO, right? But you have to have the ability, or even let me just say, use the word discernment, to be able to say, to put this in like the box of I don't know, or you know, or be able to even say, okay, I'm doing this meditation, I did these protocols, and I see this light. It's moving in a regular pattern on a regular time. It's probably a satellite. So you have to be able to take some experiences lightly and not hang on every thing that comes up. So definitely having discernment and but also being able to entertain complexity.
So what I hear you say as the advice to me would be have some sort of like objective reasoning. Understand that you have to ground yourself in what you understand and also allow what you just experienced to coexist and go from there. That's what
Exactly.
I kind of
Exactly.
picking up.
Exactly. I mean, you said that better than me. And you know, because if we're truly dealing with an advanced intelligence, we might not be able to immediately understand it, how it acts, how it interacts, even what it may communicate in a certain way. I, you know, and I mean, again, it's even that. Even say you have some kind of CE5 experiences where you do the meditation, you do the coherent thought sequencing, you see an object, it somehow interacts with your intention or your thought, and you have that experience now. I mean, of course, it's going to have some level of meaning to you, right? Some form of meaningfulness, but at the same time, I would recommend and suggest that you don't assign reason on behalf of the UFO phenomenon, which people often do, especially experiencers. And I understand why they do because I'm an experiencer. You, your brain automatically tries to fill in gaps to say they came by because of this reason and this, but my approach is not to assign any kind of anything on
Value to
behalf.
it
Well,
instantly.
Well, the value part, I mean, what your value for it is one thing, but it's we can't speak on behalf of the UFO phenomenon. And it's easy to have an experiencer and then they start preaching on behalf of the phenomenon and the phenomenon said this and and this is going to happen or like there's I'll just say there's some famous experiences right now that have this whole kind of story about what the phenomenon is here for, what they are, and what their message to humanity is. And I can see how that develops. But even Jacques Vallée, he has this idea of the messengers of deception. And I don't mean this in like any kind of negative connotation, but when you have a UFO encounter, it's easy for your mind to fill in the gaps and say, they're here because I'm the chosen one. They gave me this message about universal peace. And that's all great stuff. But I mean, we cannot speak on behalf of the phenomenon of UFO intelligence, right? Like that kind of thing, I think needs to be facilitated in a different way. Now, you can take your meaning from what the experience means to you, but we can't ascribe purpose to the phenomenon, in my opinion. That's been my approach, is because people will they can begin kind of like dictating on behalf of the UFO phenomenon, and it's even easy to have an experience like that and think I'm special now, because I've had an experience and I'm either chosen or XYZ. There's a whole process. There's a whole assortment of things that can come from that. And personally, I don't believe in exclusivism, or I don't know the proper word for
Like
it.
exclusivity for it.
Right,
Yeah.
exclusivity. Like I don't think that's a healthy mindset. That somehow we had an experience like yes, the experience could be special to you and meaningful to you, but it's kind of easy for experiencers to veer in a direction of I'm somehow special now, in the sense of like um what's there's a really good name for it in like spiritual communities, like
Well, the the
spiritual.
the the correlation I'm making, it's no different than somebody that accepts God into their life, and then they become very preachy about it because they're trying to articulate to people their internal dialogue or their internal feelings to somebody else when it comes to that. I don't see it any different than somebody having an experience with the phenomenon. They would want to do the very same thing to say, this is what it means to me. This is how impactful it was to my life. Because maybe they just haven't processed it as you started with. It's like you should probably digest your experience before you go out and communicate it, so you're just clear what you took from that or what you believed. It'd be not as fantastic how it would come across. It'd be a little bit more, how can I say, maybe humbled and processed for you to say, look, this is just what happened to me. This is how I perceived it. This was told to me, and not try to represent the totality of the phenomenon through the prism of your mind. That's what I'm taking.
Exactly. Absolutely. Cause, and it's so easy for that to happen. Because you've had this, in a lot of, times, like a really intense experience that's been, life changing or altering for you. And, you want to share that with people, right? Cause it's positive for you, but I mean, not everybody just stops and again integrates it in a healthy way, or in some cases I do think that um, the intelligence community might prop up certain experiencers so that they do that, but that's getting into something else. But yeah, I more or less.
So help guide me, right? You would say, what I hear you saying, you have to be very clear about your intent when you start it. When you go for it, you need to understand, where are you and why are you seeking that contact first. Second is then to create that contact by then meditating and putting your mind to, this is what I want to achieve. And then there will be whatever experience I get from that. Then you would say, just process that first, take it in. It's yours, individual. Feel, take what you can from that, and then be open to sharing the experience in a way of saying, this is what happened to me. And hopefully you create a safe place for other people to come and say, oh, I've had something very similar. Even if it's non-human intelligence, as we said, it could be they just processed it through a religious lens, and that's okay too. We should be open to experiencing or having those people share their ideas. I think that the openness of that is where it's really going to take us to the next level. But for me to initiate this, I'm clear, I'm ready. Where would you say that I need to go next from understanding my intent of why, and then meditating? What's the next step for me to truly commit myself to allowing an experience to come to me?
I mean, so that would most likely look like what is considered CE5 field work. So you can do preparatory meditation and CE5 protocols, which the CE5 protocols are just getting into a meditative state, right? So more or less, you're putting yourself in an altered state through meditation, whether it's a breathing technique or a visualization technique. And the CE5 protocols, as taught by, let's say in this case, Dr. Stephen Greer, he has something called coherent thought sequencing, which is kind of like the bread and butter of the CE5 protocol. So after you're in that altered state, you do a visualization process, or as he says it, remote viewing. If people are familiar with remote viewing, it's basically using your mind to see non-locally, right, out into either a distant location in time or space. So, you're getting into an altered state through meditation, that is focused, that has clear intention, that is tranquil, like a calm and quiet mind, but that is open in the sense where you are going to attempt to see either a UFO out in space or in wherever you can lock your consciousness onto it. And for people that may not be confident in their ability to remote view, right? Like maybe they're brand new to this. You can just use a visualization as a representation. And you use focused intent and visually guide UFO intelligence to your location from either out in space or around Earth down to your country, your city, your town, your backyard, and that's called coherent thought sequencing. And you're visually guiding UFO intelligence to your exact location, and that's one kind of method of doing it. I like it because it's somewhat structured, and it's practical, and in my experience, it works. And you can either do this individually or with a group of people out in the field. A lot of people feel more comfortable doing it in a group. Some people excel doing it like what I call solo CE5s, where they're just doing it on their own. But it is nice to have other people there because you can always, number one, you have more eyes on the sky, right? Number two, you can kind of verify what you saw. You have like a second opinion as well.
Do you think it also help with the grounding step that you talked about? You could say, "Hey, we all saw this. This happened."
Yes. Yeah. So, and it could be a group of, it could be you and one other person, like a friend or a spouse or, and whoever. It could be, if you're at that level, maybe like a friend from work if they're into it, right? But some people go out in groups of 20, 30, 40, 50. I mean, there are some like big events where there's like 200 people out there or more. I find that smaller groups are better for focusing intent, because also if you have a group of 200 people, everybody's intention and expectations are all over the place, and that can kind of you want coherence in this kind of exercise. So anywhere from like 2 to like 15 people is, I would say, even 10 or 12 people is ideal. But if you're doing this on a regular basis, because there's a group that I met with, we met at least once a month for a number of years. So, and we would have 20, 25, 30 people. And then on the bigger summer events, sometimes there'd be 60 people. But we were so well in sync from working together so regularly that to have that coherence was a lot easier. But you want to, if you're going to go out and do this, I always say like temper your expectations for two reasons. Number one, you don't want to expect anything, right? Like you don't want to expect you're going to see what you saw a UFO as in a movie. There's many ways that the UFO phenomenon can manifest, and if you're fixated on it's going to look like this rather than just allowing it to happen, you miss on in the area of the field site. But they're also, yeah, I mean, you also don't, if you have like, if you're fixated on some kind of expectation, you can kind of let yourself down as well as like, oh, I thought it was going to be something else. So, tempering your expectations. I mean,
What I
it's
hear you
normal to
say,
have like,
it's almost similar to entering a conversation neutral. It's like don't enter with an intent, enter the conversation just to have the conversation and take away. So very similar, you would say if you're going to start doing this, enter it very neutral. Go there just for the idea of like sending out intent and hopefully it happens, but don't go with an expectation. That's what I hear.
yeah, and in in the sense that you don't want to limit or constrict or even miss what is actually going on, because again, we're this is not a movie, right? Real life is more complex than a 2 hour film that's gonna that's for entertainment purposes. If we're dealing with an advanced intelligence that has the ability to manifest in a number of ways, it might not happen often. It's not going to happen how you expect.
Why do you do it?
I mean, for me, it's because I had these initial experiences, and I, you know, having those experiences me in a sense on a mission, right? Of inquiry. Like I wanted to know more. I wanted to understand maybe more like why I experienced whatever I did and what what is going on, right? Like what even is this? But but also it became that I did want to share with other people, and you know it's been great for me to connect with other researchers and even go out in the field and do field work with other people. But again, for me, my initial experience is what really drove me, right? Because again, when I was in the process of doing it all, at the beginning, I wasn't much like, wait, why am I doing this? It was more reactionary at first. And in one of the experiences that I had, the as far as I perceived it, the UFO phenomenon communicated to me that it wanted people to know it was here, kind of thing. And nowadays more so, I question that for a variety of reasons. Um, just trying to remain some level of objectivity and even the sense of, well, you know, I just think nowadays more so like, well, I do think that the UFO phenomenon should disclose itself to people. It doesn't, like, why should it have to work through people in a sense like that? And that gets into something I was talking about before. Um, but I do think that for people who just want to know, right? Like that is one option for you, because there's a lot of information that's available out in the public, and you can read a UFO book and kind of have some idea, or you can think that you have some idea about the UFO phenomenon, or you can watch a documentary, and they're all great information tools, right? It allows us to publicly have a conversation about the UFO phenomenon, but it, having your own experience is like you're not relying on a second hand or third hand source, because it's just like if and there was this example in a movie, Blast from the Past. But like somebody could tell you about baseball all day. You can even watch baseball on TV. You can listen to it on the radio, and you think you understand it, but until you actually play the game, then you get it. Because in that movie, it was a great example. This guy is he grew up underground in this bunker because the family thought there was an attack on America or whatever, so they were living underground. 30 years later, he comes up to the surface, and the world is still there, and they didn't know it was supposed to be. But what the whole time he's underground growing up, he is hearing about baseball and all this, and then finally when he goes out into the real world, he plays baseball, and he has this epiphany of what baseball actually is. And nobody can tell you that, right? And so for the UFO phenomenon, it's the same thing. I can tell you all day about an apple, what an apple is, what it tastes like, and it could have some level of meaning to you. But until you actually experience the apple directly, you don't have a way to orient that into meaningfulness, or what it means to you. And then from there, what are the implications and the bigger picture ideas about it? Um,
So, do
Again,
you
there's
honestly think that we'll achieve critical mass by just each individual at their pace going out there and try to get more information for themselves and digest it? Meaning, there has to be a natural interest for whatever level. It doesn't have to be super deep. It just has to be maybe just I'm open to having the conversation all the way, based on what we've already known and things that I've heard. Could we talk about how deep this could possibly go more from like a philosophical perspective, but without an individual wanting it? There's just no us reaching critical mass with this subject.
So my own opinion is like you need every angle explored simultaneously. So some people like they might be a lawyer. Maybe they don't want to get into the contact stuff. Maybe they're maybe, but they can help facilitate what we consider UFO disclosure by applying their expertise to the subject. And that's another part of engaging the phenomenon. You don't have to engage directly with the phenomenon through consciousness or anything like that. You can engage it as a podcaster by help spreading awareness. You could be somebody who writes a book on the historical accounts that helps inform people. My own thinking is that just as the world works, we depend on other people to do different things. I don't think necessarily everybody should go out and do CE5 per se. I think everybody, the people who are called to do it, are the people that should be doing it, right? I like there's like not everybody is a marathon runner, right?
Right.
It's um or not everybody is a chef, right? Like we need the variety that is within all of humanity taking on the subject simultaneously. So some people are going to be great CE5 facilitators, right? Other people are going to be great disclosure advocates. And I think it's going to take all of us and all these approaches simultaneously to really build a big picture.
So what's your hopes for this? All I mean, you put a lot of effort into your podcast and getting the guests and having these deep conversations. If you were to truly articulate what is it you hope to accomplish, what would you say that is with this?
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, I can only the way I look at it nowadays is like I can only do so much. For me, I just hope that I can help participate in this conversation in a way that because I think ultimately the UFO phenomenon, the UFO question, the UFO reality uh, is ultimately a stepping stone for humanity, right? I think it's another hurdle that we have to overcome, and I hope that we do it. It has a unifying effect because we certainly need that nowadays, and I don't necessarily think we're going to have UFO disclosure and all of a sudden become a utopian society. But I would hope that the realization that we're not alone in the universe and that there are other intelligences out there may, in some sense, give us a perspective that we're a little more alike with each other as humans and have a little bit more common interest with each other, with because of we're our awareness that there's these other intelligences out there. And I I mean, I don't think that the UFO phenomenon is threatening in a way. I'm more optimistic, but in the same sense, I believe that like the idea that we as humans should unite around our human interest is a healthy approach, right? And the the other kind of factor to this, in my opinion, is that it's not even so much about UFOs, right? I mean, of course, that's part of it, but the idea of like, who are we? Like, really, who are we as humans? Like, what is our potential? What are we capable of? And in some sense, well, okay, there's these non-human intelligences, and they built this incredible technology that we're observing. We could do that too, right? If they did it, we could do it. And again, I think there, in that conversation, there's an ability for us to kind of step outside ourselves a little for a second, go meta, right? And have a meta perspective, to even be meta human in a sense. And because there's these other intelligences out there, and they're looking at us like, what the hell are you guys doing down there? It gives us the ability to step out of ourselves a little bit as a perspective and say like, how are these other intelligences looking at us? Like, and does that affect the way that we act in a certain way, whether it's towards them or to each other and whatnot. So there's many levels of even that conversation. Uh, but for me, I'm just I look at myself as somebody, if I'm able to just contribute a small bit to a greater effort with a large group of people, I'm happy with just being able to kind of play my role in that.
Perfect. I really appreciate your time, James, that you gave me today. It was awesome. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for answering my questions. And I welcome everybody that listens to this. Please go find one of your podcasts. There's so many. Just find one that has any interest to you and just watch it, experience it, take the information in, and then, support James and go subscribe and help him make more content that is going to hopefully help all of us with figuring this out at the end. But with that, I really thank you, James. Appreciate it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I really appreciate you, broadening the boundaries and having this conversation, because it's not always an easy conversation to have. Um, Again, there has been a great level of stigma over the decades. It has been diminishing, but it's still, we need to have the conversation. So thank you for facilitating.
Anytime.